very busy news day for us today.
A very busy news day, but obviously the main focus will be the budget, due to be delivered by Pravin Gordhan in Parliament later today. I think any other news will dwarf the budget, but hey, I could be wrong on that front.
It seems like everyone sort of wants more money, but there's no growth. So it's a very tough balancing act. And then of course, we've got ratings agencies down our neck, just looking for some kind of stability. So I guess Pravin Gordhan has he's basically stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
Well, it is Wednesday and the day that we've all been waiting for, the day of the medium-term budget policy statement, which will be delivered by Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. And this time, quite a peculiar event because there's quite a lot of attention that's being focused on the minister's speech today. Naturally, he might or will have to appear in court on the 2nd of November, which adds a different element to it.
The one thing I know is that with accountants, you always find money in bottom drawers and you can manipulate accounts. Manipulate's a bit of a harsh word, but you can hold back on expenditure and you can massage the account. So, and Gordhan, I think, is very good at that. But I think fundamentally, whether we get a downgrade or not, the worry about it is that this is a country that's not growing. And whatever expenditure we've got is going into social services. We haven't got enough to invest in our growth. That's the worry. You know, all of this is short-term noise, and that, to me, down the line, if there is going to be a downgrade, it's just simply because we can't reinvest in our, in our future.
David Williams and myself were quite impressed with the amount of support that's come forward for the Finance Minister, not only for his mini budget today, but also with regard to the noise and the summons by the Hawks. Is this something different that you've witnessed in your years where the private sector is really come through? 3 years too late? 3 years too late. David?
Yeah. You know, that's my worry. And I'm anti-business from that point of view. They should have made a noise a long time ago, because every time they made a noise, they were criticised and they shrank back. You know, they shrank back. We saw it with Paul Harris, remember? We saw it a long time ago with Tony Treyer. You know, we've seen it. The only one who's been outspoken is Johan Rupert. And I think CEOs should have been a lot more vocal about what was happening here. Now, suddenly, they're panicking because it's starting to hurt their bottom line.
Workers in South Africa are putting their hope in the shoulders of Minister Pravin Gordhan. He must cross Mount Kilimanjaro in terms of, one, he's restoring hope.
We think the minister and indeed the whole government must seriously look at the SME sector, because I think this is a sector where entrepreneurship is, this is a sector whose true value has not been truly realized.
A roadmap has been painted for him through the 9-point plan. He must be able to, on each of the aspect of the 9-point plan, elaborate on what has been done.
I think quite an interesting conversation that will be taking place over the next 30 minutes, given that fast track to about a year ago, fees must fall was still quite prominent. We had a different finance minister in his position, and again some of the themes were quite similar. Fiscal consolidation, looking for economic growth, but goodness, Pravin certainly has a tight rope to walk.
I think from a tax point of view, he did allude to last year in his speech that we're looking for another plus minus 15 billion. So where is it going to come from? We got issues on the table like sugar tax, carbon taxes, which are still being debated. And clearly we look in this medium-term budget for some kind of signals as to where we're going to move forward on those kind of policy issues.
The risk with wealth taxes is the fact that wealthy individuals are very liquid, and it can lead to a lot of capital flight if we implement that tax. And there's also a worry that we cannot fully measure what the size of that tax base is, and I don't think the government and ourselves, certainly in the economic space, have a sense of how much revenue can be derived there. So I certainly don't think wealth taxes will be on the cards.
I'm not in favour of wealth taxes for a number of reasons. One, you only tax certain types of wealth, mainly land and financial assets. Secondly, it's a completely new tax system that you have to derive. So rather than a wealth tax, I'm in favour of higher marginal tax rates on higher income earners. From every perspective in South Africa, the wrong moment to increase VAT. The country is in a very, very difficult social space, and to tell people we are going to raise VAT, although the research has shown that VAT is slightly progressive rather than regressive, it will not be seen as that, it will not be viewed in that sense, and it will be seen as a heavy load to poor people.
Look at ways to grow the economy. I was quite interested to see, I'm not sure how accurate the number is, but if you compare our growth rate, apparently Zim is expected to grow at 1.8% this year and 4.8% next year.
Goodness.
So you know,
Does
the
that mean we're
veracity
all
of the
moving
numbers,
this year?
the veracity of the numbers is something else. But the issue is we're in a very bad space in relation to growth.
There will be no new presidential jet. I want to hear those words. The state that this country is currently in, a presidential jet might be the straw that breaks the back of the camel. There will be a public outcry against the presidential jet. So I want the minister to say those words. Then I also want to hear the words that the government will no longer buy imported vehicles. There's no reason why the South African government cannot only buy vehicles manufactured in South Africa.
You know, in terms of every time something comes out, that the rand weakens. But at the same time, the rand does seem to be very correlated to an overall play. So, you know, late last year, early this year, we were sort of bottom of the pile near the Russian ruble. And maybe we should have actually been somewhere possibly between, sitting somewhere between Brazil and Turkey.
SMEs are really the area where we can create jobs in South Africa. We don't need a Minister of Small Enterprises. As it is, we don't need all these ministers somewhere in economic affairs. We need a smaller cabinet. However, all we need for small and medium enterprises, government departments must pay these companies at the end of the month on delivery of invoice. The biggest challenge a small business faces, cash flow. So government must support new, small and existing small businesses in easing their cash flow by paying the invoices.
Simplicity of regulation for SSMEs is critical. I think particularly from, for example, the company's perspective, the tax issues as well. I think we can see a lot more easing in this space going forward.
Is the NDP still relevant? Because last time I checked that document, you need, what, 5% economic growth to actually meet some of those 2030 targets?
I think the NDP ship has sailed. I think we have been sitting at sub 2% growth since the Great Recession. So the 5% ship has sailed. We now need to reorganize ourselves within the current global growth context, weak global growth context, and make the right investment to generate the growth that we need.
If you were the minister, then where would you be investing?
Energy, education, and infrastructure. And I'll cut the wage bill, and I'll reduce government military spending.
I now recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance. Honourable Members, the first MTBPS was tabled interestingly in December 1997, during the term of President Mandela's government. Its purpose, as was stated at the time, and I quote, it describes government's goals and objectives. It explains the economic environment within which those objectives are being addressed, and projects the total level of resources that will be available. No one should be left behind in our march to a better life for all South Africans. The MTBPS reports to Parliament and the public on the planned use of taxpayers' funds, because it is their funds that we are using, not ours, measures to secure our fiscal and financial position, and steps to strengthen public finance management. There is a Pedi saying, I'm going to give it a hand. Titau sa shloka seboka, tishitwa kanare e shlotsa. Translated, it means lions that fail to work as a team will struggle to bring down even a limping buffalo. So either we work as a South African pack or we work as a divided pack. Either we get this buffalo, whether you like buffaloes or not is another matter. Our own economic forecast for 2016 is 0.5%, not the 0.9% we thought earlier in the year. Rising up to 1.7% in 2017, if we do the right things to support investment and confidence, our economic recovery will certainly be more rapid. If we don't, then there are, as you will see in the MTBPS booklet, fair indications of the risks that we carry. Measured and balanced and careful fiscal consolidation will continue over this period with the budget deficit declining from 3.4% this year to 2.5% in 2019-2020. Debt, which is a major target of the current period, is projected to stabilize at just less than 48% of GDP. We propose to raise an additional 43 billion rands through tax measures, 28 billion rands of which will be in the coming fiscal year. The expenditure ceiling will be lowered by 26 billion rands. So the logic, honorable members and the South African public, is very clear. If we do not grow the economy, if we do not collect our revenue properly, if we do not generate revenue in the economy, then we've got to take a squeeze, if you like, and a hit both on the tax side and on the expenditure side. We do have a platform to build on. The green shoots I've referred to are there. People can see them. Of course, some of my economist friends see them in numbers, and some of my farming friends see them in the ground. The question is, can we nurture them? Can we grow them? Institution building is never complete. It has to adapt, and this is an important aspect of nurturing our economy, to new challenges and as various interests emerge. People make mistakes, but yet modernization and transformation must continue. Fiscal policy alone will not solve all our problems. Honorable Deputy Speaker, since 1994, the size of the South African economy has more than doubled. The tax base has been substantially broadened. Education and health services have been extended. The child support grant introduced. Access to electricity widened. Water and sanitation supply has been expanded. Government debt was reduced as a percentage of GDP from 50% in 1995 to 27% in 2008. Yes, by an ANC government. All too often in history, the benefits of progress have been appropriated by narrow elites. War, conquest, colonization, exclusive trading licenses, protection rackets, monopolization of markets, secret cartels, and discriminatory laws. There are so many ways in which wealth has been accumulated by the few, while inequality and class divisions have enriched those few. But we must not lose faith in our vision of a more just society and our resolve to attain it. No one, as Archbishop Makoba said to me recently, no one should be left behind in this progress. In addition to the 16 billion rands added to higher education funding in the February 2016 budget, we therefore propose a further 9 billion rands for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme over the period ahead, raising its funding by over 18% a year. Over 8 billion rands will, to meet the costs of fee increases for students from households with incomes up to 600,000 rands. Those who are called upon to serve in public institutions have an added responsibility to work with integrity, honesty, and accountability, and to ensure that their efforts are directed towards the shared interest of all South Africans. Put simply, this means that public funds must not be diverted for private ends. All citizens are entitled to demand accountability and integrity from those who serve them, and that includes all of us.
I'm slightly concerned, Seba, because if you look at our debt to GDP ratio, it was initially sitting at 45.8 for 2016, and I understand the figure could increase to 47.9 for 2019 and 2020.
Right.
Debt consolidation, we on the right track? Are we really, when these are the figures that we deal with?
Yeah, debt levels are rising, but we need to just compare these things to get a better perspective of those numbers that we're talking about. If you to look at countries like India, they've got even a higher debt to GDP ratio. We're talking more than 60%. Notwithstanding that in Brazil, which is around 66%.
Still a very strict tone when it comes to the headcount within the government institutions, that those who leave for retirement or other purposes, their positions will not be replaced. So if we look back in hindsight, overall, are we fairly impressed with what the minister and his department have been able to do?
I think, you know, just coming back to the point about him being extremely focused from what I've seen. So over the past few years, we've certainly seen, and even in today's statement, we see a lot of policy statements coming out, giving us insights into where the expenditure is going to be going, where the income is going to be coming from, and particularly from a policy point of view, where do they want to drive the tax collections? Well, taxes, I think it's not totally off the card if the minister didn't say it. I think the David's Tax Committee are still talking about it. They're still doing their investigations into whether it's viable.
Even now in America, both candidates, well, not so much Trump, but the other, are talking.
We know how he feels about taxes.
Exactly. They're talking about higher taxes, especially for those that are wealthy. You look at all of Europe, there seems to be that trend. But I am dismayed that we have resigned ourselves in a fiscal policy construct to higher taxes. Does not support growth. What's lacking here, while it's a wonderful budget, and I think under the constraints the minister has done a good job, because we needed to confirm that there's no change in the last 20 years. But what has been lacking in the last 20 years is a shift to a more higher plateau of growth.
In a sense, he has delivered bad news. He's saying taxes are going to have to increase, expenditure has to come down. So it's a very bitter pill, I think, to swallow. But I think he delivered it gently, and I think he justified very clearly why certain things have to happen. So I think very well argued, very thoughtful.
Dealt with very tactfully. I think the challenges that he faces in terms of revenue collection and on the expenditure side are significant. I'm glad that he did, allude to the fact that some hard choices will have to be made. He's making some of them already, and he's warning us that some hard choices, both on the revenue and the tax collection side as well as on the expenditure side, are not far away.
Can we afford to increase taxes substantially over the next 2 to 3 years when our economy isn't performing at its peak?
When you have aggressive policies at SARS, and when you have effectively cash being held back, then eventually that comes back to bite you. So in today's statement, for example, the minister mentions the excellent revenue collections at the end of last year, largely because of VAT, meaning they didn't get as many, or they didn't pay out as many VAT refunds as they expected. But then suddenly there was a massive flow of VAT refunds being paid out in April and May of the current year. Now, instead of the originally proposed 15 billion tax increase for 2018, we're now looking at 28 billion to make good what we should have fixed right from the start.
That concerns me, because it sounds as though it addresses some of the concerns that the ratings agencies had, which is institutional strength and the integrity of these institutions.
In this year's budget, I think the minister sidestepped any income tax increases, anything that would put pressure on households and consumption. And it's not clear if that can be maintained, or whether in the next year something might have to be done on VAT, perhaps, something on the wealth front. So all of that, raises concerns about what will be the reaction to that. They're finally working out this idea of separating the commercial imperatives of SOEs and from the development imperatives, because often they get confused, and then all of that hides bad performance, because then SOEs always say, but we're pursuing developmental objectives. This is why our balance sheet looks so bad.
I'm surprised with those inflation forecasts. Admittedly, the National Treasury has come out and they've consulted with the Bureau of Economic Research at the University of Stellenbosch, and they, from Stellenbosch, confirm that the forecasts that are performed by the National Treasury are in line with those from elsewhere, including supranational and that in the private sector. But that inflation view is a little more hawkish to my understanding.
It's very difficult to imagine that at some point there won't be recourse to the national budget, because even if it's not financial outflows, they'll need a guarantee from the state, which is already very much stretched in terms of guarantees, and which puts a certain cloud over the strength of our finances. So from that perspective, to say it'll take care of itself, I think is quite naive. And it might end up, biting, coming back to bite Treasury.
Expenditure is one of the areas that he probably has least control over. So he can set expenditure cap, but we start talking about SOEs, we start talking about government wage bill, the use of the word advisor to other departments. That's really where his hands are tied. We can probably get 20 billion from a 1% increase in VAT rate. And that is politically seems to be very difficult in this country at the moment, but it actually is comparable to what's happening in the rest of the world.
Is it even an option at the moment, and something that we could see potentially being tabled next year, Feb, if the situation gets dire?
I think it's very difficult for any government to raise taxes from a political perspective.
Our debt to GDP was never going to go over 38%, and now it's about 45%. It was also not going to go over 40% at one stage, and now we said it's not going to go over 48%. So I think the rating agencies will take a very dim view of that we are not being able to hold to those measures. We need to look at how we can cut government spending rather than just increase taxes.
The minister's language around moderating expense growth, and then he announces 987 billion rands worth of capital expenditure over 3 years. So you can see what he's trying to do. He's trying to shift it, right? Capital formation, reduce short-term expenditure, and have long-term benefits for the economy.
I really think you can wave a magic wand here, really, and put people into the state-owned enterprises that get them to stay within their budgets, within what the country can afford, not what they want to do, and ultimately still deliver stuff for us, and it will make taxes go down. Just that will make taxes go down.
He signals, he invites, and then he acts. So last year he signaled there are going to be tax increases by not moving the brackets. Now he has invited the comment, and he's acting. Okay, so really what he's saying to us, I'm signaling lower cost growth at a public sector level, and I'm inviting you as a private sector to work with me on 987 billion rands worth of capital expenditure.
Not much has been mentioned in terms of what are we going to do to actually grow small businesses and that sector or that industry now in our economy. And having reflected on last year's midterm budget speech, I just feel like not much has actually been done or said. Different to what was said last year. The minister did mention on a couple of occasions around paying SMMEs on time and in full. But I know of a lot of small businesses that actually have not been paid on time and in full. And it's something that we've been saying for years, but it's still, there's no repercussions for those institutions or public sector institutions that don't pay small businesses.
What is the SME sector's contribution to GDP?
I think at this moment in time there's various, because it depends on the size of the informal market, and the estimates vary between 7 and 28%.
It's a united effort, which does raise concerns, because if we know that the ruling party internally is divided, how sure can we be that these policies that are looking to be implemented will actually follow through?
But if we don't have proper leadership from government and government working together, and we continue having this infighting, then the focus is lost on the economy, and the focus is lost, and we don't get clear answers on fees must fall. We don't get a leadership that says, we're talking to the students, we're going to address your concerns, now go back to class. Those are the sort of things that you would expect leaders to do. At this moment in time, that is not happening, and that is very, very sad to see.
He was literally walking a tightrope. He's had revenue underruns. He's going to have to make that up by tax increases next year. And expenditure, I guess he's been relatively well behaved on that. So I guess making the best of a bad situation. The market initially didn't like it. I mean, we saw the rand trade weaker, the bond market as well, kind of reflecting a little bit of an unease with the budget speech, maybe a little bit light on the structural reform side of things, and that's possibly causing a little bit of a concern. Was this MTBPS enough to take a downgrade off the table completely? No, I think it's very much at the fringes. I'd like to believe that the ratings agencies allow us just another 6 months worth of time to their review next year sometime.
Okay, so he did say that he's looking to increase the tax base by around 43 billion, and reduce expenditure to try and close that gap. But that still leaves about a 11.5 billion rand gap for the fiscal year that we're in. Where is the additional tax going to be coming from? Is it personal income tax? If it is from corporate tax, I would imagine that that would have a knock-on effect into the greater economy in terms of companies passing that through to their customers by putting up prices or by paying less salaries or by reducing workforce and that kind of thing.
I think the focus should just be on cutting expenditure, because I don't think that is going to be that easy to increase tax. I've also seen that by 2017, 2018 there's a plan to have increase of about 28 billion that is going to come from adjustments in tax. If you are a country that is sitting in a deficit, you're not doing anything. You need to get to a point where the collections are exceeding the expenditure.
We're talking a good game. The fact of the matter is that there are practicalities to that. I mean, if you have a look at the supplemental documents that were put on National Treasury's website, there was actually a little excerpt there which said that our fiscal means do not necessarily match our policy objectives. Now that's, in short, that's telling you that we can't afford to pay for all the stuff that we really ideally want to get.
I think the macro picture is one of recovering resource market, commodities market, and I think that those factors will support our economy going forward. I also think that as long as we see negative rates in the developed market world, money will flow into emerging markets, and South Africa might not be the best pick of the bunch yet, but it is still in the bunch. So I do think it will benefit.